I feel bad about stopping that conversation. What a morning we have already had at St. Luke's. I don't know how y'all are doing. I just cried through two sermons. I'm ready for one more. Oh my God, remarkable young people, remarkable guides to them. They are so theologically well formed. Really proud of who we are as a community. So I don't even, thank you for being here. I thought it was a completely losing proposition to try to teach a class while we're recognizing all the wonderful work of our choristers. So probably there wasn't room downstairs, so I'm glad you're up here. This is the overflow crowd. And what we're going to start to do, and you'll see this go through the fall, is we're going to take on all the big collective ideas that we think about as Christian people. We're going to talk about them. We come from a wide variety of experiences here at St. Luke's. We're going to have to close the door because I can't hear. Thank you. A wide variety of experiences, a wide variety of Episcopal experiences to begin with, and there is a wide variety, there's a range in our church. There's some people that got up to watch a coronation yesterday, and there's some that find that just offensive and everything in between, right? And we're all sitting around here. We got a lot of Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians by heritage that are here, people that have come from the Roman Catholic Church, people that have come from no faith tradition at all, which is fascinating to think about, not having to undo that baggage, but to build from scratch well, right? So what we're going to do is what we're just hearing in the pulpit as well is if we form ourselves well theologically, if we think about how we think of God, who Jesus is to us, what it means to be a Christian community, and really flesh that out, that gives us a lot of power in this day to understand what we're for, what our purpose is. And I don't want us to make any assumptions about that. But we all come from where we come from. We don't all mean the same thing when we talk about even love, right? Or who God is, or what we think God is about, or what that means in our lives. And even in different generations in the church, there was a generation in the church, a little bit before mine, where people stopped reading the Old Testament. Stopped because it was so hateful and angry and violent, had been used to defend slavery. What they didn't tell people is the New Testament had too, right? But stopped because it seemed to be potentially a cause of harm, right? And an excuse for war and all kinds of things. So there are these movements over time that have caused us that have asked Episcopalians and liberal Christians to kind of step away. And by liberal Christians, I mean liberal in the classical sense that we believe there's some good in the human person. That's the liberal disposition, theologically and sociologically. There's some good in you. I actually believe there's a lot of good in us. The creation story tells us we are in the image of God, right? And so that disposition has been, if the tradition is too hard, step away from it and go to what's good, because we believe God is everywhere. So go to the things that call you. Love, as you just heard in the sermon, you'll hear again, love is one of the ones that we go towards. Love is good. I am of a different generation in the church that I actually think it's dangerous to put the tradition away. I think we should wrestle with it. There are things that we got to put down. There are things we have gotten wrong in our church, but also you look at the biblical text and we're not doing that. We're not stoning people of any kind for any reason, right? There are things that we do put down, but we put them down having engaged them. We don't run from that text. And I would say, and I would argue in our tradition, in the Bible, in our liturgy, in our theology, often if we stick with those very traditional ideas, there's something to be taught. We'll learn something in the wrestling. Today's Acts reading is about Stephen. Now, the easy light reading is people are just ruining your life, maybe even trying to murder you, and the things that you value, you forgive them. You just keep on forgiving. Now, even I can hear the folly in that, right? There is justice in the world to seek. There is fairness. There is dignity, right? It's very important. And there is actually a depth of truth that at the right time, in the right circumstances, sometimes in shocking circumstances, the human beings have the impulse to forgive for their own wholeness. Right? We saw that in the Mother Emanuel massacres, right? We've seen that in other kinds of violence in this country. Now, sometimes that's politically organized or it's problematic, and we know that. But I don't ever want to underestimate the faith of a person who says, who sees in the way that we say that Jesus sees, right? So that is about going back to the tradition to wrestle with it, which is language from Jacob. Jacob wrestles with the angel. Some argue that he wrestles with God for the blessing that he was denied, right? For the blessing that he believed was his. And so Phyllis Tribble used to say, the great Bible scholar, wrestle with this text until it produces a blessing. The blessing doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with it word to word, but there's something there for us. Even sometimes in contradiction, to how it's been understood in the past. There's something there for us. So that's what we do as Christian people. So the reason we're going to talk about God is, look, why assume anything? Let's just assume we don't know each other at all. And even those of you that know each other quite well, let's talk about something you might not have spent a lot of time on. Let's just go to God, God's self. So the resurrection life, the reason we're using that title for the series is In Light of Resurrection. So in resurrection means to us that the things that we think have a hold on our lives, that limit us, that boundary us, that tell us that we cannot. An example right now would be, could we end gun violence? Right? Resurrection tells us yes, actually. There is a chaotic, ununderstandable future that makes no sense in the logic of the world that we live in, that is hope and justice and love. We call that resurrection, that life comes out of those death-dealing places. How we get there, I don't know, but we can get there. A huge piece of getting there is imagining that we can do it, that it's worth doing, that it's worth thinking about working on together. So resurrection is the idea that there are no boundaries, right? There's nothing out there, no barrier to the fullness of life. And to just help with that, God not limited by the past, God not limited by the baggage of people that have been problematic or troubling in your life, but God in light of resurrection, of all possibility. So let's start with this. Who is God, right? The God that we use for cursing when we're mad, right? Who is God, and why does it matter? So if you're not at a table with some people to talk to, please join one, because you're going to have conversations together, so please do join a conversation. And if you think there are too many people at your table, you can break off, or I don't know, if there's someone you don't want to talk to, I'd move right now. You're going to be in conversation for a minute. So here's resurrection God. You all know Dr. Brueggemann. The world for which you have been so carefully prepared is being taken away from you by the grace of God. The word of the prophet is to proclaim the unimaginable, the hope that is beyond our hoping, right? The God that is beyond our imagining, the God that will free an occupied people who have only ever been occupied, right? That God is the God of the prophets. We all want to believe in Walter Brueggemann's God, right? I don't know a person who doesn't. Most of us aren't there. So let's start with this. We'll take you back to Walter Brueggemann later. At your table, we all inherit ideas and images of God. Right? People have told us about them. People we love have probably taught us about them. So who was God? Who was the God of your childhood or your past? And what happened to him? So not right now. Go back. Because that God is still with us. Who was God? And what happened? Now that's a huge topic. I'll give you like 5 minutes. Like maybe 10 if it's really robust. And if you can keep an eye on, so think about it for a second. And we can always talk more about it later, but think about it. And then if you could help make sure that everybody at your table gets a chance to speak. All right? So who was the God of your childhood or your past, and what happened to him? All right, so as you're winding up, and you can't end this conversation. There's no good way to end it. There's so much conversation to have. So one of the truths in the Bible is that people name God when they're lost, quite literally. Hagar is the first to name God. Out in the wilderness, Hagar calls God by name. Hagar gives a name to God. because Hagar has been kicked out of the only family and context that she has by Abraham, because Sarah's about to have a different baby, another baby. So there she is with her son, who will die out in the wilderness, she thinks, and she names God as, who's got it? The one who sees me, right? When no one sees her, when there's nobody out there, names God the one who sees me. Jacob names God. So in the wilderness, we name God. Some of us haven't had that many wilderness places, and I'm so glad for you. But most people that are sitting in a church are sitting in a church because there's been some wilderness in their lives. Maybe there's some wilderness right now. So I'm just going to invite you to kind of just pop up, say what you'd like about if you were to name God today, how would you name God? Okay. Fair. Mary Hare said God. Yep. The one who gives hope. Sustainer. Yep. Anchor. I see you. The new Avatar. Oh. Lewis is too cool for me. I don't even know what you're talking about. Companion. Breath. Yahweh, yawning. A breath, yes. Creator. Jesus. I have a lot of Jesus jokes. I won't make them right now. Great. So what I heard a little bit, I can hear a little bit of what you were talking about, is some of you, especially I think people that come out of the Episcopal Church, often, like I was not taught to, if you had asked me, I would say intellectually, there's no image of God. God is spirit. That's what I was taught. And yet, we tend to put images on God, and many people are limited by those images of God. People often reject our faith because of the images of God, or we see quite harmful things done because of the images of God historically, though most of us, you heard the language around here, have quite expansive understandings of God. So the church struggles with, now, how do you express this? Right? How does a human brain engage this, right? So this is All Saints Beverly Hills, a wonderful church that happens to be in Beverly Hills. Looks a lot like us, doesn't it? Could totally be us. So there's something at the altar before, on top of the altar. I don't know what it was, but when I got to Westwood, which is the next town over, where our parish was, they had redone the back of their church and you can't quite see it, but it's gold, and there's kind of a bright light at the middle of it. It's kind of a white in the middle, and it kind of expands into this gold. It's really beautiful. And the idea was that Carol Anderson, who was a brilliant priest, was on a big church growth campaign, and in the city of Los Angeles, where people are not religious and very few Protestant Christians are around, that she said the space should express what we understand of God. So she puts up, it's gorgeous, right? Philosophically, it's beautiful. There's no image. And that's where most of us are probably in our sense of who God is, right? We don't have a person in our minds. But what I find interesting about the way they've used it, because it's LA, right? It's Beverly Hills, that there's the image, and it's stunning. When you walk in, it actually kind of takes up space in the room that you can't quite tell in this picture. It feels a little bit enveloping. It's wonderful. Is that because it's neutral, they can project stuff on it. I am not campaigning for any of this. This is a point. I have a point. The point is, right, that's really sweet, isn't it? But isn't that also kind of the danger? That because we say spirit, we've got someone in mind. So like Annika's sermon, do we have a God that judges us in mind, that hates us, even though God is spirit? Do we have the God of the people, of those out there, of the voices out there? The social science says that the fact of using pronouns for God give us an image of God, whether we are taught that or not, that our brains kind of hardwire to what we've been taught, so we can be the most feminist person out in the world, but have always heard of God the Father and find it to be profoundly comforting, and also be quite disempowered in that space, or disempowering to others. And it comes from, in the West, there is one image for God, right? There just is. And we know it because when we do something else, we're rattled, right? If I just say she for the next part of the liturgy, I'll hear about it. Because we have an image for God. Even those of us that say we don't, right? We do, right? Even as I say it, I can feel that I'm contesting something, right? Which I do not feel if I say he, even though I don't believe God's a man, right? So there's a norm, and the norm comes from this. This you can't see very well, but I know most of you have been there. That's the Sistine Chapel. Stunning, gorgeous, right? I tucked myself into a corner when I went through, not on a special tour because you get pushed through really fast, and I just literally squeezed myself into a corner so I could stay for a while because it's unbelievable. And the whole story of creation is around you in that space. And for those of us, I have no Roman Catholic heritage. I am from Orthodox people in India. You couldn't be more anti-Roman Catholic, frankly, than us. Colonialism, all kinds of baggage attached to it. And we too, most of the people, not everybody, we're Protestants in this room. And yet, this image of God, the heart of the Sistine Chapel, is God. Nobody's confused, right? Yeah. Even if you were never taught it, right? You could be a Protestant from Georgia, and you know that's the guy right there. It is, you know exactly what that is, right? That is the creation. That's Adam. That's the image that is kind of in everyone's minds. And you can imagine both the issues with gender, with race, all kinds of things that come from that's God and that's creation. So we use very expansive words, ideas of God and of creation. That's a neutral word. That's what most of us visualize. Like deep in our hearts, that's what we visualize. I wouldn't just throw that at you on every Sunday, but here we are in resurrection time, when death hath no dominion over us. We can overcome, and so we can. These are truths. This is how most of us are formed, even if you've never been there, even if you're not Catholic. Right? I was 30-something when I went. I was like, oh yeah, that's God, isn't it? That's what we all think God is. And you know what you think it is by looking at the contrast. So just open your mind and look at that. It messes with you, doesn't it? It can feel too particular, right? It can feel too local to a particular time. The style of art can feel too modern. But this is also particular, of a particular time, particular time in art, and a particular artist who really liked the muscles, right? Like he's doing a very specific thing, but it feels universal. It feels neutral, even to me. Like it feels, this is safe. I can put this on a cover. Nobody's gonna, well, some of you in the back might get mad at me, but you know what I mean? Like that's a neutral. That doesn't feel neutral, does it? Of a particular time, a particular place as well, right? It's what? It's political, I hear on the front row. Yeah. But I want us to think about this. This is not quick, this is slow. We need to think about this. If we are projecting who we are for the next 100 years in this, people don't get to build buildings like this anymore. No one's going to raise $50 million to do this. Here we are. There are people walking through those doors on Peachtree, right, for the next 50 years, 100 years. What should we express here, there, whatever we build next? Is there something particular to this time that's important enough that it should be particular? Is there something universal? Like who are we? Right? So this, let me make sure I know which one I'm looking at, is a similar idea of up at an altar, which is what they're doing at the Sistine Chapel. This is in India. This is St. Mary's. It's called Cheriyapalli, means small church, which is where my mother's family is from. So if you go into their altar, same, all these images, very much like the Sistine Chapel, not modeled on the Sistine Chapel. What's interesting, you can't quite, I hate to be people that puts up a slide and says you can't quite see this, but that gives you the general thing of what's going on. But because it's in India, and it's from, I think, the 1400s, and it's done with these vegetable dyes, it's beautiful, it tells the story of their community. There are Chinese people in it. You can tell by their face and their hats. There are lots of Indian people. That's why you see all the clothes and how we dressed at the time. There are apostles in it and martyrs, but all the local ones and the biblical characters, but they look like the local people. So what that would have meant is in those generations, if you had grown up in that church, like my mother is baptized in that church, her father, that family, look at that. They might have thought God looked something like them. Because that church, those images are people that look like them, and other Asians, and other people, they're Middle Eastern people. There is a trading hub. You could imagine that you would grow up in a church and think that God was like them. as we stand here, it's very hard to imagine people of color walking into a mainline church and thinking God could be like them. One of the barriers for the mainline is, do you bring in a child who's black or brown and say, in this place, take in who God is? The danger is they can see, as can the white children, of what holy things look like, right? What holy images are. It's very convicting, right? And so here are the kinds of images that you can find in other places in the world. So this is just kind of general Orthodox. Everybody's kind of beige, and you get some gold, right? There are all kinds of images there. Those are all men, I believe. So I don't mean to idealize Orthodoxy, but look at those images. They're just more and more kinds of faces. This is in the Ethiopian church. Look at all that color, right? Look at the way the face looks. It looks like people in that community. So people that grow up in those communities would see that God might be like them, that they might have been created, actually were created in the image of God, right? Gorgeous images. And then look at this. This is Rublev's Trinity. Everybody loves this one because it's community. Trinity and community, 3 persons. I think these are men, but it looks pretty, you can't really tell, right? Like, especially for a Western eye. So something that would not have been terribly inclusive in Rublev's time becomes very inclusive for us because of their skin tone and the way they're dressed. This kind of lovely idea that God is 3 persons in community, sitting around a table and discerning something. So that is a universal within the Russian church, but then look at this. This is by Meg Rowe in the UK. Yep, it's a take on Rublev. I can't remember the title of it. After Rublev is what it's called. These are 3 people in her church in North London. It's not even a composite of people. Those are 3 human beings. She painted 3 people that go to her church. And you see the link to the Trinity, right? And you see it brought into their community, and the power of it, and the holiness of it, particularity, right, of what London looks like today. So it's something to wrestle with. What is the particularity that's right? Is there anything universal? Do we believe that anymore? Are there images that are universal enough? You can probably hear that I don't. But you struggle with that in places like this. Like, what images do we put on the wall? Right? As we build new art for the future, how do we think about how God is expressed? And one way to argue that, if we don't believe in universalities, is to go extremely particular. And it might be extremely dated. As well, I would argue that the Sistine Chapel in all of its glory is of a particular moment. And if we let it be of that moment, we get to enjoy it. If we make it more than that, it becomes problematic. And so what if we dive into the moment? So this last image is a tough one, so I'll just give that to you in advance. It's an image of Mary and Jesus, the Madonna and baby. You'll know what it is referencing. Mark Bizzuti Jones asked Mark Dukes to paint this. Mark Dukes is an icon painter. Mark Bizzuti Jones is a priest currently at Trinity on Wall Street. And this is our mother, Our Lady of Ferguson. Isn't that interesting? So particular to this moment. Yeah. It actually challenges me to, can we imagine, can we take the image of God? Right? Is the image of God solely for comfort, for distance? Is it something different than us? The first time I saw this, it's the image of God, isn't it? We say it's Christ. We say it's Christ when we see suffering in the world. That's what that looks like, right? That's what that looks like. Do we have the courage to see an image of God? Do we have the courage to see the grief in one another as the image of God is destroyed around us? Do we have the courage to witness to the image of God? I didn't actually come up with a slide to follow that one. I could back it up a little bit if that's a little bit too brutal. That St. John the Divine hung it for a while. It was at St. Mary's in Harlem. Mark has it in his house. He had it in his office when I was in New York. And it is so powerful. Part of the power of the image is you don't need me to explain to you why Jesus is expressed in the suffering of black mothers and whose children are killed by the police. I can philosophically argue that with you. You might disagree with me. You could put on your brain and probably argue me out of that if you need to, why it's too particular. That image just takes you right there, doesn't it? It's what art does. And so we do have images. It doesn't mean that God is solely any image. I mean, the truth of God is not any image. cannot be, right? We know that. But if we're not particular, where is God in creation? Where do we see God? Where do we see God defaced or humiliated? In a mall, an outlet mall in Allen, Texas yesterday. That's where my family's from. In Midtown this week, right? Yeah, right? Just in a skate park, right? What harms the body of God, the body of Christ? We almost need the particular, many of us, to remember that that's what we're talking about. This isn't our politics. This isn't how you vote. This is about the image of God in the world. So I'll back it up one, because that is pretty brutal. Let's go back to North London. But these are also people who live that reality in North London, isn't it? That's the reality of London right now. So I would invite us good Protestants sitting around this table, as we were reminded yesterday, we are from a Protestant tradition, that was in the coronation, I believe, who are inclined to rationalize things and to make good logical sense of things. I am too, right? Good for us. It's one of our superpowers. To remember that images move and shape us, and whether or not you think you have them, you have them. I have them. And we realize what they are when they are contested. So let us contest those images, because God is in all creation. And resurrection life means to us that that image I just showed you isn't the only one. It doesn't end there if we don't let it end there. There is new life if we want to see it. But it might be that we need to rest in these particulars so that we fight for that new life. We're going to keep on talking about this. I don't mean to be overly, it's heavy, but you know what? Life is really heavy right now. These kids are going to inspire you out of your mind at the next service, so I don't have to do that. We're going to keep talking about it because we have to decide who we're going to be in this time, and we have so much capacity to be what the city needs and what the community needs, and so many people need to be a part of this community for their own hearts and souls. And we have to express that so that they know that it's for them. Thank you all. We'll keep going.